50 people, 60 people, or whatever registered. So that's what's going on right now. And then we'll be live in a second or two, and then I'll just introduce you. There we go.
All right.
All right, and we are live with George Kizer, one of our premier NSMA board members, former president. George has also spent quite a bit of time TIA, where he still runs a series of studies and events. And George, we're more than pleased to have you here as both a member of NSMA, a technical chairman of the FWCC, a chairman of TIA's working group for microwave systems. And we know you're going to dive deep into 6 gigahertz, which was just teed up on the prior session with Brian Tremont and the FCC's Danielle Thuman. So we'll take it away. There will probably be some questions at the back end, and we'll once you're done, we'll just pop in with those and see if you can field them. Otherwise, welcome aboard, and pleased to have you. Pleased as punch to have you, George.
All right, thanks, Joe. Appreciate meeting with you all today. Glad to talk to all of the conference members today. It's been a while since we've had an NSMA conference. We use these conferences to get together and chat about various spectrum management issues that are important to us. So I'm glad we could get together again this year and do that. Okay, well, today I would like to talk about 6 gigahertz developments. Much of this is going to be centered around the unlicensed RLAN activity. That's something that Mitchell Lazarus out of FWCC and I have been involved with for quite a while, for several years, and it's very important issue for us. And I would like to talk to you a little bit about that this morning. Now, as everybody knows, back in the dark ages, a couple of federal organizations were created to regulate spectrum. The FCC was formed to regulate commercial spectrum, and National Telecommunications and Information Administration was formed to regulate federal spectrum. Both of them adopted the table of allocations frequency assignment approach that's been used by ITU. But basically, that approach divides the spectrum into services. The table of allocations approach idea is to assign blocks of spectrum to compatible services. The good news is this is administratively efficient, and it's been used for decades. The bad news is spectrum usage density varies from allocation to allocation, and therefore is not spectrally efficient. Now, we know upper and lower 6 gigahertz are very heavily used in the United States. There are about 100,000 simplex links in those bands. But it's also fairly well known that some portions of the 6 gigahertz spectrum are relatively lightly used. And that's an issue with federal regulators. A few years ago, it was noticed that we need to increase spectrum utilization. That politically became very, very hot back in 2018. We need to use spectrum more efficiently. And guess what? 6 gigahertz came up in the discussion. In early 2018, a consortium of Silicon Valley companies got together and presented a proposal to the FCC to introduce radio LANs or RLANs into the 6 gigahertz bands. The RLAN group proposed 1 billion unlicensed devices to be spread throughout the United States by 2025. The channel bandwidths would range from 20 megahertz to 160 megahertz, but they would only use one channel since they're using time division duplex instead of frequency division duplex. In October of 2018, the FCC released a notice of proposed rulemaking suggesting comments on the unlicensed use of 6 gigahertz. And a year and a half later, April 2020, the FCC released a report and order authorizing the use of unlicensed spectrum for our lands. The new rules allowed unlicensed access to the entire 6 gigahertz band, 5.9 to 7.1 gigahertz. This is more spectrum than any other country in the world has authorized to unlicensed lands, but that's the U.S.'s attempt to be very proactive. There are two types of R lands authorized. A standard power is authorized for use indoor or outdoor that would be under the control of an automatic frequency coordination system. That system is yet to be defined. We're working on the definition right now, and I'll have a little more to say about that in a moment. Low power indoor R lands and very low power devices are authorized without an AFC. However, they can only be used, as I noted, they can only be used indoors. R lands come in two flavors. There's an access point, that is the device that connects to the internet and provides services to other devices. Those other devices are client devices, and they're under the control of the access point. Typically, the access point has a little higher transmit power than the client devices, and so it's the device that usually that we're most concerned about when we're worried about interference. But then client devices could be if they're outdoor and in the beam of a fixed service antenna. The automatic frequency control operators will be authorized by the FCC. The FCC also supported an industry-led multi-stakeholder group to further study the technical and operational issues associated with its sharing of service. I'll talk a little bit more about the multi-stakeholder group in just a moment. The report and order also requests comments on increasing the power of indoor devices and allowing very low power devices to be used outdoors. That, to put it mildly, is very controversial, and as yet we have had no further conversation. We've heard no further comments by the FCC on this issue, but it's certainly of concern to the fixed operators. Lastly, fixed microwave service retains its primary status. Existing and new services have no coordination requirements with the unlicensed devices, and the unlicensed devices cannot cause interference to the fixed service, either existing or new. So that's basically a summary of what the report and order provided for us. Now, these unlicensed devices are already coming out. The Netgear Nighthawk is the newest one that I'm aware of, but I've seen a few others popping up lately. So the devices are out there. Of course, there's nothing that can talk to them right now, so you're not going to hear them yet. But in the near future, you would expect them to go into operation. I want to point out that this service of unlicensed operation in 6 gigahertz is called Wi-Fi 6E. The current version of Wi-Fi, the latest version of Wi-Fi in the 5.8 band is Wi-Fi 6 without the E. And the current version of Wi-Fi is 802.11ax. We can expect a new version, a post-AX version of the standard when 6E is finalized, probably by WinForm. But we'll talk about that in a moment also. The Commission created 4 new unlicensed bands: Uni 5, Uni 6, Uni 7, and Uni 8. The standard power AFC control devices will go into Uni 5 and Uni 7, which are the traditional lower 6 and upper 6 gigahertz bands. The AFC theoretically would know where all the licensed services are because all of those devices are in the ULS database. Now, the low power indoor devices can be in any of the bands, but they also have access to Uni 6 and Uni 8, even though the standard power devices do not. Primary reason for that being Uni 6 and Uni 8 don't have a ULS database to allow AFC control. Most of the RLAN devices will be indoor, either high power or low power. So that's what we're going to be dealing with for the next few years. Primarily will be indoor devices. The devices will be managed or unmanaged. The unlicensed devices will have their highest power will typically be on the order of 20 dBm into a 30 megahertz channel. They will be unmanaged, but they will be indoor. Now, I'm not sure what indoor is. I'm sure it could be, it includes areas like loading docks with open doors and balconies and things of that sort. But theoretically, the idea is that these devices will be deeply embedded in the bowels of a building, and you won't see them from an RF perspective. And I think in most cases that's probably going to be true. The standard power units are significantly higher powered. But they will be managed by the AFC. The interesting aspect of this management is it will not be traditional frequency management. It will be statistical. In other words, you won't be looking at what's really out on the path. You will be looking at the statistical characteristics of that path and making a determination of whether or not statistically you would expect interference. Also, although it's called an automatic frequency coordination device, there's really no coordination involved at all. In current frequency management, all of the new entrants into the area coordinate with all the existing users. In this case, there will be an automatic frequency assignment made that does not involve the licensed service. So the new unlicensed device will go in based on a statistical analysis by the AFC without the licensed user being involved in that process or getting a right of refusal or any of that sort of thing. It's important if you want to be involved in, we'll talk about the AFC definition process, but determining what is interference and determining how it's calculated statistically is very important because that will be the heart of how the system works. And setting up the statistical parameters are extremely important for success in this area. And I would recommend, if you have an interest, that you be involved in the process and making that decision. Undoubtedly, eventually there will be problems. I mean, there will be RLAN sitting in conference rooms with picture windows or out on the balcony or something. Or the AFC statistics won't be right for a particular region, and you'll get interference. And that's going to be very interesting, very difficult to resolve. So it looks like there will probably be a new service, interference bounty hunter. It looks like a realistic option for a new service that we don't currently have. Well, as a fixed operator, what should you do in this new environment of unlicensed RLANs? Well, first of all, you need to update your FCC ULS database. The AFC will be doing its frequency management based on data in the ULS database, and if your data is not correct, it's going to make an inappropriate decision based on interference into your link. Secondly, you should do a link analysis of your paths and see if there's any building or any location that might potentially cause an interference case to occur. And for those paths, you need to monitor your performance and then be prepared to take action if interference occurs. To to check your ULS database, so you could of course do that yourself, but it's very cumbersome and difficult. I would recommend that you work with your frequency coordinator to verify that your ULS data is correct. Here are the contact points for the major coordinating houses, but of course there are many other people that do coordination too, and you can work with them. But these are your most typical contacts that you would use. You perform a risk assessment of your network. What does that mean? Well, you create a KML file for your network and open up Google Earth and you start looking around along your paths and see if there are places where an RLAN could exist that could potentially cause interference. Now, this is an example of a real microwave path in Dallas, Texas. That building at the right-hand side of the path is Dallas City Hall, and and about 1,300 feet away is a hotel with all sorts of rooms in it and conference rooms and what have you, which undoubtedly will have some RLANs in it, and it's directly in the microwave path. I would say that's a pretty high probability of having interference, and that path should be monitored very closely. Now, how what do you look at when you're trying to say what might be an interference path? Well, for one thing, you want to look at buildings that are within perhaps a mile and buildings that are within 5 degrees of antenna bore site. If you're outside 5 degrees, if you're farther out than 1 mile, I would say it's statistically unlikely that you're going to have interference. But if the building falls into that relatively close, relatively bore site case, you ought to consider that path as a path that has potential for indoor RLAN interference. Okay, well, you need to be prepared to monitor performance on those paths. Well, you need to monitor the availability of your radio paths and establish a baseline so that you know next year when you start seeing these devices being deployed and utilized, you know that something has changed on your path. Now, in that regard, Aviat and Nokia are currently working on software to assist on this. So with their radios, you would have the capability of doing that, but you could do it manually yourself if you have a network management device that takes performance data on the links. Now, received signal level history is not useful. It doesn't tell you whether you're having interference or not. What does tell you if you're having interference is an historical record of severely erred seconds or frame loss seconds. They will tell you if you're having interference, and you would want to monitor that both directions on the path and see if it changes. More severely erred seconds in one direction or than the other is indicative of interference. If you have fading, usually multipath fading or rain fading, usually you'll have severely erred seconds that are roughly the same both directions. But interference causes the path to become more susceptible to fading, and therefore you will get more erred seconds in the direction of interference. Adaptive coded modulation radios can be caused to switch without a corresponding received signal level change. In other words, if you see an adaptive coding modulation radio changing state, but the path is not fading, it's a very high probability that there's interference involved. You might consider, if you're seeing interference, especially if it's periodic, you might consider taking the path out of service and running a standard fade margin test or a spectrum analyzer sweep. But of course, that takes this path out of service and is very intrusive. Another possibility is to take a drone and run a spectrum analyzer up and down the path looking for potential interference. And Tom Brinkover will be talking about that or has talked about that at the conference today. He has capability of doing that. I have no association with these business, so this is not considered an ad. I just tell you that capability exists, and that those kinds of testing is not intrusive to your operation. All right, let's suppose you have problems. What the heck do you do about it? Well, you try to resolve it with the operator, but having already had discussions with the hotel operator just down the street from the Dallas City Hall, I can tell you that not everybody is charmed to discuss the situation with you, and so you may end up having to deal with the interference case at arm's length. And if you do, then you need to get some data. Here are the facts that the FCC wants you to tell them about. I won't list those. You can see those on the presentation later when we're done. But you will get that information together, and you will send it to the FCC Enforcement Bureau and ask for their support in resolving that interference case. But for the unlicensed case, it's up to the user to resolve the issue. If necessary, with the FCC's help. So the burden is on you for the unlicensed low power devices. For the high power managed devices, there are three organizations currently defining the AFC. There's a WIN forum, and it's accredited to make standards and will develop standards for use on the AFC. It's focused on the needs of the users, and it's also focused on determining some of the esoteric details, like what constitutes interference, what are the critical technical issues of over the horizon propagation and clutter on paths and things like that. There's a multi-stakeholder group. That was the group that the commission asked to be put together. It is focused on the needs of all parties, and it works with both WinForum and Wi-Fi Alliance to resolve issues, but it's not accredited to make standards. So this is kind of a free form group of everybody to get together and talk about their issues, but this group cannot create any standards that would be enforced reinforced on the AFC. So it's an interesting discussion group, but it has to take its results and use them in WinForum or Wi-Fi Alliance to create standards that would be useful for the AFC. Lastly, the Wi-Fi Alliance. That's an organization that's been around for quite a while. It's been involved in the standardization of Wi-Fi devices, and it has been very successful in that, as we all know. They set the standards for Wi-Fi devices worldwide. They create standards, and they're focused on Wi-Fi device standardization, and that's very important to their organization. And then they've been very successful at that. WinForum has several committees. These are the folks that are in charge of those committees. These are the areas that they're addressing that are of interest to the users. Specifically, these are the functions that they're addressing. Interference, of course, is a very important issue. There are a number of issues that we're having to address in these committees. Interference is probably one of the most difficult. We've got to take a look at how to determine statistically over the trans-horizon propagation, clutter. How do we handle antenna patterns, especially when about a quarter of the antennas in the ULS database are not defined by a model? And even if they were, there's nothing in the ULS database that defines what the antenna pattern is for these devices. And many of them, the antennas in the ULS database, are no longer supported by companies. So it's a very interesting problem. And then, of course, you've got incumbent information. How do you deal with that when in the ULS database there's often missing data, and even in some cases incorrect data. I remember some cases where I had a path in Phoenix with coordinates out in the Pacific Ocean. That's not typical, but it does happen. And then you've got the issue of coordinating with Canada and Mexico. That's an interesting issue because legally that has to be done by the federal government, the FCC. So how they coordinate unlicensed spectrum at the borders is going to be interesting. WinForm is also getting a little bit into AFC test and certification, but that's going to be a fairly light effort because that kind of impinges on the activity of the Wi-Fi Alliance. So I doubt that will be a heavy duty task. But the interference in incumbent information is going to be very, very important. And that's something that Wi-Fi Alliance has not particularly historically worked on. Here are the leaders in the multi-stakeholder group. They we've got quite a few people. We've got 3 different work streams: process for harmful interference, up-to-date incumbent information, and AFC development and implementation. These are free-form discussions. Keep in mind they don't result in any enforceable standard, however. They just raise issues. Anything that's going to be done legally will have to be moved to WinForm or Wi-Fi Alliance. These are the 3 work streams that those folks are dealing with and the topics within them. Lastly, we have the Wi-Fi Alliance. Those folks have been around for quite a while. They set the standards and the certification processes for Wi-Fi products. They'll be setting those for Wi-Fi 6E. They are primarily interested in standardization and interoperability and making sure that all the devices work properly together. Historically, they've not been involved in some of the technical aspects that will have to be looked at in the AFC, interference, propagation, things like that, have never been an issue that they've been involved in. So they will need the support of the the WinForm group to figure out how to deal with those issues associated with the AFC. So that has certainly been an exciting time in the last few years on 6 gigahertz. But what else could happen? Well, as luck would have it, other things happen. This month, the FCC changed its RF exposure rules. I'm sure you're all aware of that. Historically, Part 101 fixed point-to-point microwave systems have been exempt from RF exposure limitations. It's a rather convoluted. This slide is a very convoluted slide, but basically it details how it is that today, well, before, not today, but before May 3rd, you really didn't have to do an analysis of fixed point-to-point links because the energy was so low, it was not deemed to be an RF exposure hazard. In December 2019, the Commission published a new moratorium opinion and order changing the methodology of assessing human exposure to RF frequency. They changed the criteria and replaced their previous standards. These new rules went into effect May 3rd, just a few days ago. The Commission said that all facilities have to be considered, and this includes all licensed and unlicensed transmitters. They all are now applicable or are under these rules. There are no blanket exceptions, and you have now 2 years from May 3rd to determine whether or not you're in compliance with these rules. So now we've got 100,000 licensed paths and who knows how many unlicensed paths that all have to be evaluated by their operators within the next 2 years to confirm that they're in compliance with the rules that became active May 3rd. Now we're going to discuss these rules some more later this morning in a roundtable. So I won't go into any more detail on that, but I just want to point out that that's something totally new and different. Definitely affects 6 gigahertz. Actually, it affects all of the bands, but it certainly, since we've got a whole lot of paths at 6 gigahertz, it's certainly going to affect a lot of people in the next 2 years. You're in the process of a lot of people are in the process of rolling out 5G systems, and in their spare time, they're also supposed to analyze 100,000 fixed service links. I'm sure that's going to be on the top of their priority list. Okay, what are the key takeaways from this presentation? First, regulatory frequency management is changing. There's absolutely no doubt about that. The old block assignment methodology is starting to go away, and we're starting to see sharing of different types of systems in the same block. That's totally different than what we've seen in the past. Frequency management is going to be a shared user responsibility. As we see, it's going to be the fixed service licensed user that has to monitor his system to see if he's being interfered with by low power unlicensed RLANs. That's new. That's new for the licensed services. They've never had to worry about monitoring for interference, except maybe checking when they first go into service. Now they can have interference while they're in service, and that's going to be an entirely new problem for them. The licensed services should verify their records so that the AFC knows where they are. The fixed service should perform a link risk assessment to see if they're at risk of interference. And then they should monitor the link for performance to see how the link performs. And lastly, if they are finding interference, they need to be prepared to take action to protect their links. Unfortunately, the commission's not going to be looking for interference. The fixed users have got to be looking for interference. So today we're on the threshold of very significant change to the way frequency management is accomplished. If we're successful, we'll have made a major step in the evolution of frequency management. We will have changed frequency management from the way it's been for the last 100 years. I hope we're able to accomplish this. I hope we're able to make this work. Let's all strive to be successful in this very brand new way of performing frequency management on our licensed and unlicensed spectrum. Any questions?
George, thank you so much. Thank you so much. One large scale question was, do you think that there's going to be any type of service available that'll make it easier for companies to comply with this thing? In terms of three things. One is the unlicensed devices are clearly a potential danger. We heard this also from Mitchell yesterday, as you mentioned. And is there any way for a service to come in to do more sustained measurements on the unlicensed device interference potential? Is that?
Well, I think that's in the near term. I think that's got to happen because the existing fixed service receivers have no methodology of knowing that there's interference. In other words, you can't tell if your fade margin has been degraded in service. You have to take the device out of service to measure that. And so any interference potential has got to be determined either either by monitoring the performance of the path, which is very time consuming and occurs over a long period of time, or you have somebody proactively monitoring interference in the area. That's such as using a drone with a spectrum analyzer, or perhaps some other methodology to measure unlicensed transmitters in the presence of fixed service paths. And you could, it can be done. The trick is to do it economically. And I think use of drones to monitor spectrum along a path is probably the most economical method of doing that. But I think near term, you've got to measure that interference in some way that doesn't involve the operation of the fixed service operator.
Yeah. I know that Brian Tremont earlier today mentioned, he did mention that there's, a lot of incumbents, and, you've been a champion of this for a while. I mean, there's well over 100,000 critical infrastructure links across the country. We're talking dam management. We're talking state police infrastructure. We're talking utilities. We're talking the very networks that everyone relies on, the broadband networks. And, the fact that this is being monkeyed with is of high concern. So yeah, maybe we end up with a fleet of Tom Brinkotter, drones in every city or something. But hopefully, some solution comes to the forefront. I know we're at the top, 1 minute over, but I wanted to before we close out, I wanted to just thank you again for your attention to detail on this really critical issue. You're getting a lot of emoticons coming up. If you can see them on the screen, I don't know if you can, but that's 2021 speak for hand claps in the virtual world. So thank you for your time and attention. I know you mentioned we'll be on the Human RF exposure panel to talk about those issues in more length later today. And Mariana's here. So.
Yes, thank you so much, George. That was great. For those of you who weren't here with us yesterday, first of all, thank you for joining us on day 2 of the virtual conference. We are going on a 15-minute break. So just a reminder that we do have networking tables in the lounge. So all you need to do is click on one of those seats and you'll be able to join a networking table and chat with other people that are here in the conference. Quick rundown of the platform in case you weren't here yesterday. At the bottom of your screen, most of y'all have already been using the emoticons. Those are great because, as a reminder, the presenters cannot see you. So it's great to know that there are actual human beings listening. It also has the, yes, happy faces. It also, you'll see the raised hand icon. So if you have any questions, just click on that and we can give you the virtual mic and have more interactions here on stage, which is also great for the speakers. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see the chat section, which is how we can send you notifications, and feel free to type anything there that you want to send to the group. You can also click on the attendees section and you can see everyone who's attending the conference at the moment. If you hover over their icon, there's 3 dots and you can send them a direct message if you'd like to connect that way. But anyways, thank you so much. We'll practice with another round of applause for George. Yay, George! Thank you. And have fun connecting over the break or getting, water, coffee, whatever it is. And we'll see y'all back here in 15 minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks all.